She threw me out in the rain, no warning, no reason given. Just her voice, cold as marble, telling me to take my things and leave. And the worst part? I went. I picked up my bag, walked through those iron gates, and I never looked back. Not because I didn't care. Because I cared too much to beg a woman who had already decided I was nothing. My name is Daniel Hess. For 2 years, I drove Vivian Caldwell, the wealthiest widow in Ashford County, to her board meetings, her charity galas, her late-night visits to a cemetery where her husband's grave sat, beneath a white oak tree. I knew the exact route she preferred when she was anxious. I knew she took her coffee without sugar, but added it herself if no one was watching. I knew that behind the tailored black dresses and the permanent expression of controlled contempt, she was a woman who hadn't slept soundly since the night her husband Marcus died. I knew all of this, and she treated me like I was furniture. That should have made it easy to walk away. It didn't. Vivian Caldwell was not a kind woman. Let me be honest about that from the start. She was sharp, demanding, and deeply suspicious of everyone around her, especially people who worked for her. She believed, on some fundamental level, that everyone who came close to her money had an agenda. Her board members, her lawyers, her personal assistant Elena, who smiled too wide and stayed too late. And me, Daniel, the driver who had been quietly, invisibly loyal since the day she hired me. I still remember the first week. I picked her up from a board meeting that had run late. She got in the back seat, looked straight ahead, and said, "You're 3 minutes late." I hadn't been. I'd been waiting for 40 minutes. But I said nothing. I learned quickly that arguing with Vivian was like arguing with weather. You didn't win. You adapted. The humiliations came gradually, then all at once. She once stopped me in the middle of a hotel lobby, guests, staff, everyone watching, and said loudly that I had given the wrong address to her guests and made her look incompetent. I had given the address she told me to give. I knew it. She probably knew it too. But she needed someone to absorb her anger that afternoon, and I was there. So I stood still, looked at a point just past her shoulder, and said, "I'll be more careful, ma'am." And I watched something flicker across her face. Not satisfaction. Something more complicated. Almost like she was testing me to see when I'd finally break. I never broke. I think that made her trust me less. There was a man named Garrett Cole who began appearing at the estate about 8 months into my time there. He was a financial consultant, mid-40s, silver-tongued, and expensive. He called Vivian Viv, which no one else dared to, and he arrived with Italian shoes and opinions about her investment portfolio. I noticed the way Elena's eyes tracked him whenever he was in the house. I noticed that his visits always aligned with days when Vivian was distracted or grieving. Anniversaries of Marcus's death, quarterly board reviews, nights when she'd had too much wine and was too proud to show it. I started paying attention to things that weren't my job to notice. The documents first. I drove Garrett to and from the estate multiple times, and once, he forgot a folder in my back seat. I didn't open it. But I saw the letterhead through the clear plastic cover. It was the name of a law firm that Marcus Caldwell had dismissed before his death. The same firm that had pushed a contested amendment to his estate trust. I knew this because Marcus himself had told me, 3 weeks before he died. Yes, Marcus Caldwell had spoken to me. Not as an employer to an employee, as a man who was frightened and had no one safe to tell. He'd called me into his study one evening when Vivian was away at a conference. He looked older than his years that night, and his hands were unsteady in a way I hadn't seen before. He said, "Daniel, I want you to stay close to Vivian after I'm gone. I don't know exactly when that will be, but I know something is wrong, and I know she won't see it coming because she trusts the wrong people." He didn't give me names. He didn't have proof yet. He just looked at me and said, "You're the only one here who has nothing to gain." He died 11 days later. Heart failure officially. I stayed, not because of my salary, because of a promise to a dying man who had looked at me like I was the only solid thing in a room full of water. For a year after Marcus died, I watched. I drove, I stayed quiet. While Vivian's inner circle slowly, carefully tightened around her, Garrett became more present. Elena became indispensable. The board began pushing Vivian toward a restructuring that would shift operational control to an external management firm, one that, I'd discovered, had shell company ties to Garrett Cole. I was a driver. I had no authority, no credentials, no formal power. But I had a phone, a memory, and the name of Marcus's personal attorney, a man named Howard Briggs, who operated out of a small office in Decatur, and who had been quietly investigating the same threads I had pulled. I passed everything I found to Howard Briggs, discreetly, over 4 months. I never told Vivian. I didn't want her to feel watched. I didn't want her to feel more unsafe than she already did. And honestly, I knew she wouldn't believe me. She would have seen it as an attempt to make myself important, to insert myself into her world under the pretense of loyalty. That was how her mind worked. Everyone had an angle. Everyone wanted something. She wasn't wrong to think that way. The people around her had given her every reason. She just made the mistake of including me in that group. The end came on a Tuesday in November. It had been raining since morning, that gray, relentless kind of rain that makes everything feel like an argument. Vivian had just come from a tense board meeting, and Garrett had ridden back to the estate with us. I could feel the pressure in the car, the way she was holding herself very still in the way she did when she was trying not to show how much something had shaken her. When we arrived, Garrett stepped out first. Vivian stayed seated for a moment. Then she got out, and as she passed my door she said, quietly but with total finality, "I need you to clean out your things by end of day." I turned to look at her. "Ma'am?" She didn't look at me. "Garrett's firm is providing a security and logistics team going forward. Your position is being replaced." A pause. "It's nothing personal." It was completely personal. I could see it in the rigid line of her shoulders, in the careful way she wasn't meeting my eyes. Something had been said to her. About me. Someone had poisoned this well. Carefully, surgically, and I knew exactly whose hands had held that knife. But I didn't fight it. I didn't explain. Maybe I should have. Maybe if I had laid everything out right then, the documents, Howard Briggs, the shell companies, all of it, she would have listened. Or maybe she would have looked at me with those cold gray eyes and said I had fabricated all of it to save my job. I didn't want to find out which. I took my bag. I walked through the iron gates, and I disappeared. I moved back to my sister's place in Decatur. I got work doing deliveries. I spoke with Howard Briggs and told him everything I knew, told him the timeline, and asked him to keep my name out of it if he could. He said he couldn't promise that. I said I understood. Then I stopped thinking about Vivian Caldwell. Or I tried to. It took 6 weeks for the collapse to reach the news. The headline read, "Financial fraud case rocks Ashford County estate. Executor named in multi-million-dollar scheme." Garrett Cole's photo was directly beneath it. Elena's name appeared in the 3rd paragraph. The board restructuring had been halted. Vivian's attorneys had filed emergency injunctions. The shell company trail had been fully documented. Howard Briggs had done his job. I read the article twice. Then I set my phone down and went back to work. I told myself I felt nothing. I was getting good at that particular lie. It was my sister who told me first. She showed me a small article, not a major publication, just a local business wire, with the headline, "Caldwell Estate Sources Confirm Anonymous Tip Led to Fraud Investigation. Driver Identified as Key Informant." My name was in the 4th paragraph. 3 days later, Vivian Caldwell called my phone. I stared at the number for 4 full rings. Then I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready. I didn't know what she would say, and I didn't trust myself to hear it, without feeling things I had spent 2 months carefully dismantling. She called again the next morning, and the morning after that. On the 4th call, I answered. There was a long silence before she spoke, long enough that I thought she might hang up. Then, very quietly, in a voice I had never heard from her before. "Stripped of the armor, stripped of the command," she said. "Why didn't you tell me?" I took a breath. "You wouldn't have believed me." Another silence. "Daniel, you already thought everyone around you wanted something from you," I said. "If I had come to you with that information, you would have looked at me and thought I was trying to make myself irreplaceable, and you would have fired me anyway." I heard something on the line that might have been a sharp breath, or might have been the beginning of a word she couldn't finish. "I was trying to protect you," I said. "The way Marcus asked me to." That was when she broke, not loudly. Vivian Caldwell didn't cry loudly. But I could hear it, the way her voice fractured at the edges when she said his name. I could hear 2 years of grief and pride and terrible loneliness compressed into a single exhale. "He told you," she whispered. "He was scared," I said. "He loved you. And he knew you were going to be surrounded by people who didn't." She asked me to come back. Not in the formal way she had asked me things for 2 years, not with instruction or expectation, but in the uncertain, unguarded way of someone who is finally, after a very long time, asking instead of telling. I drove to the estate on a Thursday afternoon. The iron gates were open. She was standing at the top of the stone steps, no makeup, no armor, just a woman in a gray sweater who looked smaller than I remembered and somehow more real. The white oak tree in the distance was bare. The sky was the color of old silver. She looked at me for a long time. I let her look. "I'm sorry," she finally said. 2 words. The most expensive 2 words she had probably ever spoken, because they cost her something she had been hoarding for years. I nodded. I didn't rush past it. I didn't say it's fine or don't worry about it. I just let the apology stand in the air between us like it deserved to. Then I said, "You should know, I would have done it all the same, even knowing how it ended, because it was the right thing to do. That's all." She looked at me like she was trying to understand a language she had never been taught. And then slowly she came down the steps. Not to shake my hand, not to make any formal declaration, just to stand close, close enough that I could see the exhaustion and the grief, and the long-held fear finally beginning to ease in her expression. And she said, very quietly, "Stay, please. There are moments in life that don't need drama or decoration. They just need honesty and the courage to remain." This was one of those moments. I stayed. Vivian Caldwell did not become a different person overnight. She was still demanding and still capable of a coldness that could freeze a room. But the contempt was gone. In its place was something more honest, a guardedness softening, degree by degree, into trust. She began asking my opinion on things. Small things at first, later, larger things. She stopped sitting rigidly in the back seat and started occasionally sitting in the front. She still took her coffee without sugar in front of others, but I noticed she'd stopped adding it in secret. Maybe she'd finally decided it was all right to be seen as herself. Marcus had been right about one thing. I had nothing to gain. Which meant that when I finally let myself feel what had been building for 2 years, quietly, stubbornly, without permission, it wasn't strategy. It wasn't ambition. It was just the oldest, most inconvenient kind of truth. She had hated me because she couldn't forget me. I think she knew it even then. And I had stayed silent, because some people are worth protecting, even when they make it very hard to love them. Tell me in the comments, do you think Vivian deserved a second chance, or did she have to earn it first? I want to know what you think. If this story hits something real in you, share it with someone who believes that the quietest people in the room sometimes carry the heaviest love. There are more stories like this one coming. Class, sacrifice, pride, and the people we almost lose before we learn to see them.